to the first book because they were very, very good to work with. And so we're hoping we're going to be able to get enough money to do it.
Different pictures?
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
In a few cases, they were essential. Yeah. Like the Calypso, for instance.
Right.
And because that's such a rare, happy picture. I took weddings, one beautiful, terrible to say beautiful, but it is a beautiful picture of a funeral procession. I think that is in the book, but it's very subtle. But it's because everything is black except the light on the brown faces, and it's real. It's no act.
Yeah, yeah.
I took pictures of the mercy killing of Nancy, the horse, Albert's horse. They waited till the guests came because then they thought maybe the guests would help them get some money so he can get another horse, and because he had the buggy that was the taxi.
Yeah.
And that marvelous picture of him with his top hat.
Yeah.
and Nancy with a straw hat on.
Yeah. That's
And so I didn't show that one to them. I mean, that was, but it's some indication of how peaceable it was. There was one tragedy. One boyfriend the girlfriend broke with the boyfriend, and he threw lye in her face. And she was a very good friend of mine, the mother. I've forgotten her name now because I've lost contact with her. The only contact I have with is the Persetti woman who did the business for Prick Sands. I've forgotten which. I think she was Victor's daughter. And her mother was a friend of mine. She had the postcard shop down by the harbor. And then I went for my personal reasons. And I needed time for myself. I was working very hard. And so I would sit in front of my cottage and in the chair, and I'd have binoculars on one side and the camera on the other and a yellow pad in my lap, and I was writing. And then, I was watching the hermit crab crawling across with a snail shell on his back, and the Baltimore Orioles were fighting with each other, and I could hear the tennis people playing. And then at 12, I would go and walk the beach, say hello to my friends, swim, and then walk the beach. And I walked the beach at different times of day. Many, as you see, is a beautiful beach.
Yeah.
And that was taken I had just taken, used the camera about 2 years. It's a series of 3 in which we have vertical, the marsh grass. And for instance, of course you've got to be there, because one day we found, I say we, me and my camera, found this little space. It was very quiet. It was in the morning, and it had washed over the sand, and it was shiny. And then there was the shadows up here of a couple of trees, hemlock sort of pointed trees, and then the wash was coming in. And to me, I've used that in the book about one time when I was having a very serious time as a teenager and scared to death. And I felt so lonely, and I didn't know what was the matter. And my father said, "Why don't you take the car and go out to East Galesburg in Illinois, and where I had been happy." And that was my father watching in and saving me. And also not only my father in the present, but in the past. And I had that to be built on. So there's a lot of psychology in my writing. And I use myself as a guinea pig. Because you can't write this kind of personal thing
Right.
about anybody else.
Yeah.
Except your parents, and they're not here anymore.
Is that them?
That's my parents.
Yeah.
My father was a congregational minister. We were very, very poor. And my mother was a Greek and Latin and German teacher before she married. But I inherited a lot of creativity. Yeah.
Evidently.
And my mother and my grandmother gave me permission not to marry. Because they knew, as much as they loved having children and so on, but they missed out on so much of the independence that they had had before.
Right.
So now I want to end with the private trail. I thought of it as my trail. Down, if you're standing facing Eleuthera, you go right. Is that north?
Yeah.
I think so.
That's north.
And you're in the place at the south end.
Yeah, we're on the south
Yeah,
end.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I always thought of that as mine. I never ran into anybody there. At the end, it was very rugged. At the end, you could get around to the house where the Pines lived. And that was the one.
Oh, that's way up north.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where King Edward got away from his wife. He would come from Nassau and spend some time there. And the Pines bought it, and they hired me to take pictures of it before they had it repaired. But otherwise, there was one day, near the end, I was walking and the sun was going down, the sky was so red, and the reflection was so red, I took off my shoes and walked in, and I had the camera down here, and I saw something coming in from the mangrove island. Well, the men at the village said, that was just a sand shark. He was curious. But boy, I clicked and got out of there. So when I came back, it was evening, early evening. And the water was just that color. This is the picture right here.
Right.
And instead of taking the mangrove island, this is sort of a message to the photographers. I could have taken the island and the great blue heron that was standing there, but instead I moved over and concentrated on these little mangrove shoots. This is the way it reproduces.
Yeah.
And when my friend Dr. Leslie saw this, he said, that's music. That's music. And I said, well, for me, it's the synapses in my brain when I am very happy taking pictures here. And so if you look carefully, you see it's the crosshatch. These are coming up here,
Yeah.
but the little wavelets are going this way.
Yeah.
And they're identified in part because the sun is, what little light is left is washing them. And what's fascinating is that when the light changes, sometimes the shafts get very intense, and sometimes they almost disappear.
Yeah.
So it's one of my most favorite pictures. Now let's see, I think I have a, yeah, well, I just wanted to say, that I had fought the government over a right to be a photographer.
Oh, work permit?
Do you remember that?
Well,
Yeah,
everybody
you
has-
knew about it.
Yeah.
And we paid it off, and then, we delayed it for about 8 years, and my friends and my parents helped to finance that, and I won. It was Frank Kaufman, Barbara Young versus the United States of America. And Frank Kaufman, I met him later, And he said, I said, well, I'm still in the red. And he said, oh, that's not what I meant. He said, I knew you were an artist. And I think, well, when I had come back from Greece, on Harbor Island, I had met, at Big Sands, I had met the Hodgkins who worked for the Oriental Institute in Chicago. And they took people on tour, and they were going, and they asked me if I would go and at half price, if I would take pictures. Well, I had just come back from vacation, I didn't have any money, and I called Mrs. Wurzburger. I didn't know her. And she said, why did you call me? I needed $2,000. And I said, well, I knew that you were interested in art and that you might help me because I think this would be very important for my career if I do. And then when I found out that the archaeologist who was leading the trip was a good friend of my brother Harvey's wife, who also taught Greek and Latin, and she had translated for him. So of course I had to go.
So this is Greece. Greece.
Greece.
Yeah.
Yeah, Greece. Yeah. The blue, the White Dark Sea is right there. Back there. See,
Yeah.
over that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is taken Olympia, where the original Olympic Games were.
Beautiful.
And the people would come. I framed this way because I thought it looks like a watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe people would begin to take photographs and hang them on their walls. And if you go down, if you look carefully, there's a little river down there, and that's where, on the other side of the river, is where during the original Olympic Games, whole villages would come and camp during the whole time. So I know all that's there, but you can't see it.
No.
Yeah. So what I've said here is that the other day at 98, I was talking, I think, with Sister Mary, the Catholic chaplain, and looking at the way my nephew, Harvey's son Harvey, had hung the pictures like this, and with, I think, a lot of consultation about what went with what and everything. And I said, that's my backbone. That's my backbone. That probably the most important thing in my life, in many ways, has been the photography.
Sure.
And of course, and the life that was saved because of Harbor Island.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your equipment? What kind of cameras and film?
Well, I'm not very good at that. If my brother Arthur were here, he could tell you all about it. Of course, none of them are here. They're all gone. And my sister also.
You mentioned a Hasselblad.
Oh, and that's the other thing I didn't mention, that is that when I almost died, when I was 40-some, they thought I had cancer. It turned out not to be, but I had a huge cyst. And it was a major operation, and so by the time I got back to work, there was no time to grieve. But when I got to Harbor Island, there was time. And something told me to take the Hasselblad, and Hasselblad was there. So I was visiting the moms, M-A-L-M, moms. And so I took the camera and walked down towards the beach to a path. And here are these two trees. This is February. And this was a deciduous tree. And this was an evergreen. And they were almost intertwining, life and death.
Yeah.
And I was on my knees, just shaking and going around trying to capture. Next year I went back to see my trees. This one was dead, had been cut down at the ground, and this was hanging like that. And it's called Kiss and Loss.
Mm-hmm.
And amazingly enough,